So yesterday we had 165 people come together, and we listened to very important and stimulating presentations, and we also sat at 17 different tables and reflected on what was learned during those presentations and your collective experience and wisdom, and what challenged us, what moved us, where we saw the past and where we see the future. So this morning we want to begin by sharing with you a sample of responses to some of the questions that were considered yesterday. Cue the slides. And now a song. Here we go. Yeah, wrong slides. Contrary to popular belief, Ken's a different person. So the question one is, from what you heard yesterday during the research and policy discussions, what were 3 takeaway points that resonated with you? And so we'll have people at tables. We actually have some people at tables who have some of the things that we culled from the information that we got from you guys yesterday. And there's a microphone, too. It should be a microphone. Okay. Okay, here comes some microphones, just in case.
I like being part of a movement. The issue of screening remains highly controversial. For example, what is the value of screening? Who should screen? What do you do with the information? Why do you want to know about ACEs if there isn't anything you can do about it? Are you mandated to report to the area?
Ladies first. Okay, Emily, give her the microphone. Nope, still not on.
Healthcare professionals need to routinely take the relationship vital sign, for example. Do you have anyone in your life that you can rely on? We need this is working. Thank you. Healthcare professionals need to routinely take the relationship vital sign. For example, do you have anyone in your life that you can rely on? Thank you.
That's resonance.
That's resonant.
Can you hear me? Hello?
There's a little thing at the bottom that turns it on. Okay.
Shout it out.
We need to demonstrate the opportunities, costs, and benefits to standardizing ACE testing.
There is a growing body of interesting and impressive research into the integration of mind-body and mindfulness interventions.
Take the dual generational approach to dealing with things.
Okay. Question 2, if there's resistance in your community to addressing ACEs, what is it?
Secondary trauma, anger at the individual served because the staff is so traumatized.
Many frontline providers feel powerless to make change within their own practice.
Our pull yourselves up by the bootstraps attitude worries me that people will use trauma as an excuse.
Worries about violating people's privacy.
Resistance to change at the top. People prefer the status quo.
Parental resistance to answering questions, especially questions about multiple punishment.
Economic barriers. Who's paying for it? We don't see the hurt child in a traumatized visual constructed adult.
And our third question, what changes can make a profound difference in addressing or preventing ACEs and or creating more trauma-informed communities?
growth by framing the data in terms of hope and resilience.
Tap the resources of men and fathers. Identify a public champion or aces and celebrity.
Teach social and emotional skills and parenting skills as part of the standard education curriculum of middle and high school.
Replace what's wrong with you with what's happened to you.
And I read this at the wrong time. Take a dual generational.
There's no shame. Don't worry about it.
So I think that a dual generational approach to dealing with it.
And so we hopefully summarized a lot of what you said and did, and that work that you did yesterday is appreciated. There will be more to do today. I would love to introduce Dr. Sandy Bloom, who you'll hear from later this morning, and Dr. Dave Corwin, who's the incoming president of the Academy on Violence and Abuse, who's going to present a very special award. Oh, okay. Yep, she's coming in the back, from the back. Serpentine.
Oh, you're helping me out. That's great. Good morning, everybody. Come on up here. Come on. We're very happy, both of us, to give a special award to our friend and colleague, Frank Putnam. Frank, as many of you know, is ill and doesn't plan on recovering. And I remember the first time, I don't know if any of you had this experience, but I don't know when it was. I remember the room we were in. We were in an auditorium. It was some conference, probably in Boston, in the early 90s. And Frank presented his data. He was at NIMH at the time, and he presented data on the first longitudinal study of sexually abused girls. And I had never wanted to stand up and cheer before at a presentation of a scientific results of a scientific experiment. But that's what we all wanted to do, because the people in the room were people who were treating adults who had very complex problems, and we knew they were related to their past experience of sexual abuse and all kinds of child abuse, but we didn't have any underpinning, substantial knowledge other than our own experiential knowledge. And here was Frank showing this amazing data that he had. And later, when I became the president of the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, he was willing to be my vice president. And not unlike the US government, the vice president is a pretty thankless task. You do a lot of work and you go to all the meetings and you're on all the phone calls, but that's all that ever happens. And he was wonderfully supportive of me and my work and what I needed to do. I think his contribution to our field is impossible to calculate. And many of you may not even be that familiar with Frank, because he's a very low-key, humble guy who is much more likely to promote and support the people who are underneath him rather than claim any fame for himself. But the field of developmental traumatology would not probably have happened for a long time without Frank. At the time when he was doing that research on sexually abused girls, that was not a popular research topic. It took a lot of courage and honor to even pursue that topic and pursue that grant at NIMH. And I think Frank suffered a lot for that stance that he took on saying this was important work to do. And he followed that up with a lot of work on dissociation and multiple personality disorder at a time when you could just get laughed out of a room as a psychiatrist if you talked about multiple personality disorder. Woo-hoo! And we now know there was nothing goofy about it, that lots of people with severe trauma suffer from those kind of dissociative disorders. And he wrote a book about, really the first book about multiple personality in adults, and then he wrote another one for children and adolescents. So for me, I think Frank represents really, and always has, what a true scientist is. Somebody who consistently and with enormous integrity challenges the existing status quo and fearlessly faces facts that no one else want to see, while using the scientific method to really break through barriers that have enormous implications for public health in the interest of human improvement. I think he has, since leaving NIMH, he's had many other positions, but always as a public health professional, a psychiatrist, a teacher, an administrator, a writer, and a great humanitarian. And I'm sad to see that he's going to leave the planet, but he leaves us with an enormously wonderful legacy. And Frank, we just want to say thanks.
I second everything that Sandra just said. Frank, in my view, is really the father of developmental traumatology. And like Rob Anda at CDC and his struggles to get the ACE study initiated, keep it going, keep it funded, get it through the IRB, all those travails, Frank has faced that kind of opposition that you talked about in the entire course. I first met Frank in 1980 at a meeting of the American Psychiatric Association. We're both psychiatrists. He went on and trained in child psychiatry after that time because he felt it was important to this research and the studies that he wanted to do. But over the years, we've traveled many of the same roads. We've spent a lot of time together. We've spent a lot of fun times together because one of the organizations that we belong to, the Helfer Society, plans in a half day of adventures at every meeting. So hiking, canoeing, kayaking, whitewater rafting, all those great times. And those have really been precious, in terms of getting to know a person, through all kinds of experiences. When I gave him the Distinguished Scholar Award at the ABA meeting a few weeks ago in Minneapolis, I mentioned that, he also reflects the intergenerational transmission of intelligence and wisdom and humility. One thing that he regrets he ever told me, because I've told others, is that when I was trying to persuade him to come to Cincinnati after his time at the NIMH, he shared with me that his father had been a scientist. Frank Putnam Sr. was, in some ways, the father, or certainly one of the fathers of cell biology. And he was a traumatologist in that, I just thought of this morning, but he chaired the Nuclear Casualty Commission for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, that's about as extreme a trauma as you can conceptualize. So Frank comes from a tradition and a family of science, and he brought the highest level of science to this field. He also brought a humanism and a caring. And I saw that probably most directly in his concern for the young woman who was originally in my publication known as Jane Doe. Some of you may recall that series of publications and the fact that Elizabeth Loftus and others broke her privacy, and published in an effort to attack the whole idea that maybe somebody could lose the ability to recall a trauma and then remember it later. But he was very concerned about, and her name is Nicole, and she's graduating in a couple of weeks with a PhD in clinical psychology. And Frank was always concerned about her as a person and how she was doing, and agreed to write, again, and there's a special issue of Trauma, Violence, and Abuse, that he has an article about his concerns about the ethics issues and how to allow for ethical review of case reports so as to prevent the kind of violation of privacy and things that occurred in that case. So I feel that Frank has been both an inspiration, a friend, a role model, and to this field, he has given a very important legacy. And he wrote an email to Martha expressing his apologies for not being able to be here. And we have his permission to share this. So I'm going to read that. And then we're going to look at just a brief comment, and then I'm going to be done before my time is over. Dear Martha, I'm terribly sorry about ruining the surprise. Not that I can do anything about changing my New York City trip. I made a commitment in a legal case more than 2 years ago, and now it is being called in. I spoke with Dave Corwin last night, who also tipped me off to the surprise. I'm very touched and moved that so many people want to reach out to me and let me know that I have been important to them or made a difference in some way. I am humbled by that. I am very sorry that I can't come to Philly. It was in my plans until my old promise was called in, which I must honor. Everyone should understand that I am at peace with my situation. My wish is to spend as much time with my wife and 2 sons, who live in Tucson and Boston, as possible, and to finish a number, 7, of work projects, including 2 books, that reflect my current thinking and lifetime experiences. I am limiting my travel to personal and project-specific short trips, as traveling is becoming increasingly exhausting and painful. I hope to keep contributing as long as possible, including a paper we call the son/daughter of the Synergy paper I sent you, which will further extend the enormous implications of the ACEs. But I'm not going to any medical extremes, and will enter hospice when the time comes. Again, please convey my extreme regrets to everyone that I am not able to attend the Philly celebration. But as I said in Philly last week, it isn't about you or me, it's about the children. So instead of me, I urge you to use time to celebrate everyone's work that contributes to discussing or to decreasing ACEs. Best regards, Frank. Wow. Frank has given us, with his colleague Penelope Trickett, and now Jenny Knoll, in their longitudinal cross-sectional cohort design, which multiplies the power. Don't ask me what all that means. It was impressive to me when he first explained what it was to me, and I can't say I remember, but it does supposedly multiply the power of a relatively small number of subjects. But he's given us the connect the dots from childhood, with 100 and some data sets, including many biological data sets, that takes this retrospective observation from the ACEs, now replicated multiple times and in different ways and different samples, different methodologies. But he, along with the other biological research, shows us how it connects from childhood to adulthood on various dimensions. And it's now approved and funded for a couple of more future samplings of that cohort of sexually abused girls and the comparison subjects, which creates the power of the study. So I'd like to just play the very brief video. That this is taken from Frank's discussion after he heard Vince and Rob present at at the Academy on Violence and Abuse's 2011 meeting. And this is on the web now, on the internet. His 2011, it's 22 minutes long. You can view it. We can make it possible. We'll have to discuss and think about some of the implications, but it's where you can get to it and show it to others. It's very profound. It includes, can we play it? Are you ready to go back there? Okay, let's just play it. I've been stalling for time.
ACEs changed the landscape. It changed the landscape because of the pervasiveness of the ACEs, the huge number of public health problems, expensive public health problems, depression, substance abuse, sexually transmitted diseases, cancer, heart disease, chronic lung disease.
All right, so you can see that by visiting the AVA website and click on the little V in the lower part of the home page. That's Vimeo. That shows you all the videos in the public domain. His entire 2011 plenary is there. We're also going to put his 2013 plenary address that presents the study on the sexually abused girls, so you could go see him present it in his own words at the current state of evolution of that study. And on that same site with the Vimeo, there are a few policy edits and educational edits in the public domain about the ACE study that you can download and use in your efforts to educate others and to educate students about the ACEs. So Frank has given us a great legacy. I'm very happy, and I want to thank Martha Davis and the organizers for giving us the opportunity to say these few words about Frank this morning. Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know this, it's not in your program, we are having a whitewater rafting trip on the Schuylkill midday today. It's not in there because it was kind of a surprise. But I now have the honor and pleasure of introducing my good friend and colleague, Ken Ginsberg. He's a professor of pediatrics and at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, Director of Health Services of Covenant House of Pennsylvania, or Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia or Pennsylvania? Pennsylvania. With special attention to prevention and recognition of the social context and stressors that impact upon both physical and emotional health. He has more than 80, count them, 80 publications, including 20 original research articles, clinical practice articles, chapters, 3 books, and video DVD productions, and is currently working on an adolescent textbook, a video adolescent textbook for the American Academy of Pediatrics. And he's going to say, "Our kids are not broken, the importance of resilience in overcoming adversity." Thanks, Ken. And he's going to be down here, right? Yeah.
Good morning. I was actually, when you said Covenant House, I didn't know if I was going to tell this story or not, but 4 weeks ago, I was taking care of a young woman. It was just kind of a routine intake at Covenant House, and it was this lovely woman dressed in Islamic garb, and she had this bright smile on her face, and she talked about how much she wished to take care of children, because when her dream was to first run a daycare center, and then after she ran a daycare center to kind of build up her credentials until she was a pediatrician. And she was talking about her love for children. And we talked and I celebrated that love. And because so many of the kids who I care for are kids who are completely committed to healing the world. And we celebrated that love. And she said, I have this one concern. She said, here I am ready to take care of kids, but I don't remember my childhood. I don't really remember anything. Well, I do remember some things. I remember getting thrown down the stairs. And I remember looking in the casket and seeing my daddy. I remember that, but I don't remember having little shoes or anything. I don't remember getting hugged, and I don't remember any trips to Disney World. Is it okay if I don't remember my childhood? Our kids are not broken. Today, don't expect a single p-value from me. What we're going to be talking about, we're going to focus on how we look at kids. Not only in terms of how we view kids, but the forces within us that flavor or create the situation about how we convey how we view kids. Because those forces get in the way of the only thing that really heals, and that is love. And if we are not able to look at ourselves with self-reflection, understanding how if we begin seeing kids, not in terms of what they're doing right and how they can contribute to the world, but in terms only of what happened to them, then we become part of the problem. So we are going to be talking today about resilience. So let's begin. By thinking, how is it that we're going to define success in childhood? And the first thing we have to think about is what we're really doing. When we are raising children, whether we're parents or doctors or nurses or teachers, when we are raising children, we have to remember what we're really doing. What we are doing is not paying attention to the 8-year-old in front of us or the 14-year-old in front of us. What we are doing is raising a 35-year-old. That's what we're doing. We're raising a 40-year-old who's ready to take over our world. And that is so critical for us to think about. Because when we do think about that, then we can begin to think about the traits that we need in human beings. We need kids who are going to be happy. But what does happiness mean? It's not the same as looking at an 8-year-old. In an 8-year-old, you hand them a cookie and they're happy. Happiness in adulthood is about being content. It's about being content with the contribution that you are making into the world. Then we need kids to be committed to repairing the world, tikkun olam, to be committed to making a difference. What does that mean? We need kids who are compassionate, who are generous of spirit, and who are empathetic. We need kids who are going to be hardworking, who are going to have grit, who are going to have tenacity. When someone else looks at them and for any reason looks at them and suggests, you can't do that, that makes them just want to fight harder. We need kids who are creative and who are innovative because all the best ideas, they haven't been thought of yet. We need kids who have collaborative skills, who can get along with other human beings, and who also have leadership skills, meaning that they can really take an idea, bring it to the next level, and who can take constructive criticism, who see constructive criticism as an opportunity for growth, not as something that shuts them down. And we need kids who are resilient, because as much as we would love to wrap kids in protective quilts, as much as we would like to protect them from every adversity that will ever strike them, number one, it's not possible. Number two, I'm not sure it's even good for them. Because when we are looking for the truth, which is kids who are going to be generous, who are going to be compassionate, who are going to be empathetic, we need kids. I mean, where do you get that from? On some level, you get that from the pain that you need to endure. So, I am not saying that we shouldn't fight with every bit of our energy those adverse childhood experiences you've been talking about. But I am saying that we shouldn't wrap our kids in bubble wrap either. So when we talk about resilience, what are we talking about? We're talking about the ability to overcome adversity and the capacity to bounce back. We start with understanding that it's a mindset. When something bad happens to you, do you see it as a catastrophe or do you see it as an opportunity? When we think about resilience, we have to understand that it is our reaction to stress. And we have to understand that stress is something that is hardwired into us. Why? Because we are meat. Right? We are meat. We are prey. And it is about being able to transform our bodies instantly so that we can escape from a tiger. And so one of the first parts of the mindset of resilience is being able to look at a situation and say, is this a real tiger or a paper tiger? With the bottom line being, if it can't chew your face off, it's not a real tiger. Resilience is not invulnerability. I could move into your house, I could raise your kids, I've raised my own, and I could not create kids who could handle every situation in every circumstance. I could not, nor would I want to for the reason I said. Each of us has a story. I don't think there's anyone in this room who's randomly devoting their life to healing children. I don't believe it. If you look at me, it's 17. 17 was a year where I almost killed myself, but never really tried, but thought about it every day. The worst year of my life. Would I ever want to go through anything like that again? No. But you know what it gave me? My life, my purpose, my sense of mission. Resilience is not invulnerability. Resilience is not a temperament trait, right? You know a kid's temperament when they're 2 years old. You know whether they're the kind of kid, you know how they're going to do in their college interview, right? Are they the kind of kid who's going to be in the middle of the room going like, hey, look at me? Or are they going to be the kind of kid who's going to be behind you? We know their temperament early on. Resilience is not that. Resilience is about the supports and circumstances that we put into kids' lives. It is about us. I could summarize 60 years of research on resilience while standing on one foot. Here is what we know. We know that the kids who make it, despite difficult times, are the people who have at least one adult who believe in them unconditionally and who hold them to high expectations. Who should that adult be? Ideally, that's parents, but guess what? It's people like us too. It's aunts and uncles and coaches and priests and rabbis and social workers and doctors. This is who it is. And who believes in someone unconditionally. What does that mean? Does that mean like, dude, it's okay to do drugs? Is that unconditional belief? No, it's I'm not going anywhere. I have your back. And who hold you to high expectations. Is that about grade? Is that about performance? No. It is that someone absolutely knows who you are. Someone absolutely believes in you with full knowledge of who you are. For my own girls who are 17 years old and when they wear high heels are now taller than me, okay? So for my own girls, you know who they are? They're 17, so right, you can imagine we have our moments. But let me tell you who they are. They're the little girls who, when we were on a trip to Belize once, they saw a chicken hanging out of a pot with legs sticking out. And they said to me, one of them said to me, Abi, did you know that when people eat chickens, they're eating real chickens? Why would they do that? Don't they like chickens? They wouldn't let us kill bugs. They wouldn't let us turn off the lights during the summertime. Why? Because the moths were happy flying around the lights. And if we turned off the lights, where would they go? We had to go to Home Depot, honestly, and buy a tractor beam flashlight to walk the moths outside to be with their moth grandmas. That is how delicious my girls are. And during the worst of times, there is someone who believes in them intensely and holds them to that level and that depth of character. That is what high expectations is. Because the other thing that we know is the kids live up or down to your expectations of them. Don't you know that that's true? Don't you know it? In the home, in school, everywhere. It's about living up or down to your expectations. That's everything you need to know about resilience. Truly, the rest is commentary. I could be done now, but I'm not. All right? So, what else do we know? We know, let's talk about the youth development movement and the literature that we know from the youth development movement. The first thing we know is that we matter. It's about the people. People come for the basketball court. People come for the computers. They don't come for the tutoring. They'll do that after you get them, okay? But what really makes a difference in whether a program is going to make a difference in youth is about us. We, the people, matter more. Kids come for the content, but the context is what heals. Next, young people need to feel valued. When we see them as the experts in their own lives, they learn that they matter. They learn that their opinions matter. Next, youth are often the very best teachers for youth. All right, we know this. There's good research on this, and it's common sense. There's no one more powerful than kids to teach other kids. Adults can be constructive and supportive, but when we dive in and say, let me do this for you, there's nothing more disempowering. What do kids hear when they say, oh, you knocked over your blocks, let me help you? I don't think you can. Adolescence, this is really important to me. This isn't a core principle of youth development, but it is a core principle of my life. Adolescents, believe me, are still capable of healing. And one of the things that I worry about whenever we think about primary prevention is we're always thinking about children. And God forbid we would forget how capable of healing adolescents are, because that is my life work and I get to see it. Next, almost everything that we fear in adolescence, almost all the behaviors that we fear, whether it's cutting or eating disorders or bullying or violence or gaming or sex out of the context of a good relationship or drugs or alcohol, almost everything that we fear is about kids reacting to a world that feels stressful to them. And telling them what not to do, doesn't work. It's shaming and it's disempowering. Instead, we have to welcome them and invite them in a healing process to come up with other ways of coping. This is a model that I created for the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's now used by many national organizations. It is masterfully stolen from the youth development movement, okay, and kind of put together. The first thing we need is confidence. If we're going to have a kid who's going to be resilient, the first thing we need is to have a kid who believes that they can. Now, we had the answer to confidence years ago. We developed the self-esteem movement. Do you remember that? We made every kid feel special just for burping, right? Everyone got an award. Every kid felt as special as a butterfly and as unique as a snowflake. Seriously. We had kindergarten curriculum where you would cut out snowflakes, they'd put them on the walls, and they'd say, kids, each of you, you're as unique as a snowflake, right? What happened when those kids got to college? They fell apart. They were a mess. Why? Do you ever have those moments where you just don't feel special as a butterfly? You have those? Real confidence comes from competence. Real confidence comes from knowing that you are doing something well and not having people undermine your competence. I'm giving an evening talk tonight. We're going to cover that pretty intensely. Not having people undermine your competence. All right? Next, connection, because the bottom line is that when someone has my back, I feel more secure. But up till now, you've got a gang member. Check it out. Gang members, really confident. I'm highly competent and deeply connected. It's character. Having an understanding of what is right and wrong, having grit, having tenacity. And we undermine people's character when we say, gosh, you've been through so much. I hold you to lower expectations. That doesn't help. All right? Contribution. Having a sense that, that you are going to make a difference in the world. So, the ultimate act of resilience, in the worst of times is to turn to another human being and to say, brother, I need a hand. That's it. That's your ultimate act. What is it that's going to allow you to do that without shame or stigma? It is the experience of service, right? When you give, you learn to feel good. You learn that that it feels good. And what that means is that when you need to take, which all of us will need to do at some time, we can do that without shame and without stigma. But it's more than that. When you give, you are surrounded by thank yous. And for all teenagers who are held to low expectations, being surrounded by thank yous matters. For our racially oppressed minority kids who receive messages that they are less than or not good enough everywhere, being surrounded by gratitude, by thank yous instead of condemnation is profoundly, profoundly important. Next, coping. We already talked about coping. We talked about the fact that telling kids what not to do is not going to make a difference. What is going to make a difference is sharing with them good alternatives of what to do. And finally, control. You either believe that the world happens to you, or you believe that the choices you make can make a difference. For kids who have been abused, more than anything, perhaps, is this sense that there is no control. You don't even have control over safety over your own body, perhaps. The world happens to me. Dr. Ken, when my time comes, your time comes. That's why I'm going to live fast. Die young, maybe, but I'm going to take care of what I need to do right now. Those are people without a sense of control. This afternoon is going to be about brief interventions that address some of these C's. Right now, we're going to be really continuing to talk more about the philosophy. So, being trauma-informed is healing because as I heard someone say, and as I learned from Sandy Bloom, when I can look at a human being through a different lens and instead of saying what's wrong with you, to be able to say what happened to you, it changes everything, everything. But focusing on trauma or risk possibly holds the potential to re-traumatize. So because kids live up or down to our expectations, it means that our attitude really, really matters. They read us. They know what we expect. They know whether or not we perceive them to be broken. And kids judge our attitude very, very easily. So, Karen Pittman, someone who's been a role model for me in the youth development movement, her line is, problem-free is not fully prepared. In general, when we look at kids, particularly poor kids, we seem to be satisfied when they don't. If you're not doing drugs, not in a gang, and not getting pregnant, we're celebrating. That's not good enough for my kids. That's not good enough for anybody's kids. We have to have a completely different mindset that says that every kid, all kids, should be prepared to lead us into the future, to be fully prepared. We have to remember the importance of discipline to kids, to giving them a sense of control. We have to understand what adolescence is. Adolescence is about trying to answer one fundamental question, which is what? What's the question of adolescence? Who am I? That's the question. Who am I? So think of it as a 10,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. Someone puts it on your table, right? And says, here, you've got 4 years to put together this puzzle to figure out who you are. Where do you begin? How do you begin putting it together? The edges. You put together the edges. Those boundaries are what discipline is about. Good discipline is about being able to have someone say, I am going to keep you safe because I value your safety. Here are the edges. Everything in the middle, you can put together the pieces, you can shove them together. You have lots of flexibility, lots of opportunity for growth, lots of opportunity to test your wings. But the edges, those are clear because I love you so intensely that I keep you safe. And then what's the next thing you do? How do you then begin to put together the puzzle? What's the next thing you do? You put together the whole borders, power of discipline, and then you look at the picture in the box. You cheat, right? You say, hey, what is this supposed to look like? That is the power of role modeling. Because we are the covers on the box. And when you have a parent at home who gives you appropriate edges and who shows you what the picture in the box is supposed to look like, you're ready for normal, healthy development. And when you lack that, how do you begin to put together the puzzle? So for those of us who heal youth, for kids who haven't had appropriate boundaries, boundaries become even that much more important. If you come to Covenant House, one of our core principles is structure. We have all sorts of rules. The kids hate them, and they absolutely cherish them. Because it says someone is watching out for me. Next, we have to have high standards. We cannot say, well, this kid's been through so much. Of course, that kid needs extra support, extra adults in their lives to teach them, people who will take them on no matter what, people who will become their godfather or their big brother. We need those people in their lives without a shadow of a doubt, those extra supports, those programs. But when we begin holding kids to different standards because they've been through that, we perpetuate the cycle of oppression and tragedy, and we affect their character. How do we portray youth in general as a society? Are we portraying youth at risk? Right? Here is Rudyard, Montana. 596 nice people, one old sorehead. Anderson Cooper comes to town. What is the headline? Does Anderson Cooper walk around town and say, like, can I meet some of your nice people? Right? What is Anderson Cooper looking for? You know, where is your sorehead? I heard there was a sorehead in town traumatizing your community. 3 years ago in the city of Philadelphia, you could have thought that anytime 3 black kids got together, you were having a flash mob. You could have really believed that because we set people up to look for the problems. So Anderson, the Today Show calls, and they ask me to be on the Today Show. And Matt Lauer says, so Ken, Dr. Ken, I want you to know that 37% of 10th graders, I'm making up these numbers entirely, okay? 37% of 10th graders are having sex. Crisis in America. How did this happen? What should my answer be? What should my answer be? How would you respond? Thank you, Matt, for the opportunity to celebrate youth. You know, it is such good news that we have so many kids who, despite all the influences on society, from society, are doing the right thing. Thank you for this opportunity. Why? Because developmentally, kids are trying to figure out who they are, right? And they are, the corollary question of who am I is, am I normal? And they are looking everywhere for clues that say whether or not they are normal. And those clues, they're not hearing the 37%. They're hearing, hey, you know what gets attention? At this point, I do a lot of military work, and I was at Fort Sill about a year ago. And at this point, a father raised his hand, and he said, you know, my 12-year-old son last week had a conversation with me. He said, Daddy, you know, I'm going to be a teenager soon, and I hear that teens are really, really difficult and cause a lot of problems for their parents, and they're really moody. You know, I'd really rather not cause a lot of problems, and I really don't want to be moody. Is that okay? So from a developmental perspective, when kids are trying to figure out what normal is, this is a disaster when we harp on what is wrong. From a resilience perspective, when we understand that kids live up or down to our expectations, we begin to understand the real tragedy that we are producing. Kids, are they problems to be solved, or are they problem solvers? It's more than the words we say. It's not about slogans. It's not about being on the Today Show and changing the paradigm. It's more than the words we say. It's what we convey. It's what we convey when we sit with a human being. Do we pity? Are we paternalistic? Or are we listening totally for the strength of the human being to bring it out? First thing you need to do to be able to take care of traumatized people, or in fact, any teenager at all, is to know where your buttons are. Because you know what? As I said, every one of us has a path that had us come in this room, right? You could have gone into business, all right? So all of us have a path. And if you're not, the business is bad if they give money away. So the point is that you have to know what your buttons are. Because if you don't know them, when a kid comes in and they push them, you are not going to be therapeutic. And you are going to convey messages that are not going to be helpful to that kid, right? Because your buttons were installed during adolescence. So if a kid walks in and they look like someone who bullied you, you're not going to treat them very well. In the perfect world, I would spend, a couple days here. Mostly for those of you who don't know me, I do 8 to 16-hour trainings. So it is torture that Martha asked me to do this in 45, okay? But the point is, if we were really training you, we would ask you to look at yourself. So since I can't do that, let's do me. So I reached puberty when I was 16 years old, or almost 16. I was like 16 the next Tuesday, right? And so as a result, who am I? I am the boy who in 8th grade looked like I was 9 years old. And I lucked out because I was adorable. And so all of the 9th grade girls, the 8th grade girls, remember how you were making maps of like the partition of Louisiana Territory and stuff? There was a map of my naked body called the partition of Little Doll Territory. And as I would walk down the hallways, the girls that owned that piece of me would grab it. It was great, all right? But what it means is that I am stuck. I am stuck. And it means that there are certain kinds of kids, and I could tell you story after story, but in the interest of time, we're going to leave that one. All right? I am stuck in that area. So what happens when I see a 14-year-old girl comes into my office and she's beautiful? What do I want from her? What? I want her to like me. Let's get a little bit cruder. What do I really want? I want her to think I'm sexy. Because like cute I had down, nice I had down, what I never had was sexy. Do you understand how sick that is? Do you understand how potentially dangerous that is for me to have an interaction with this kid and to want something from her? That's one of many buttons I have. If you don't know your own buttons, then kids will push them and you will not be able to have a therapeutic relationship to them because their pain, their adversity will bring up your own stuff. And on some level, you will ask for healing from them, which will disempower your capacity to give the love that they need. Body language. But it's all about body language. I work with the toughest kids in Philly, who are the biggest doll babies, as any of you who work with this population would know. But it's all about body language. For marginalized kids especially, let's think about, when I say marginalized kids, what groups of kids do you look at And based on their external appearance, you know them. You make decisions about who they are. Name for me groups. Gangs, for sure. Bulimics? You don't necessarily see a bulimic, but you do see an anorexic, and you're going to make decisions about them. Obese kids. Poor kids in general. Kids in wheelchairs. Gender atypical gay kids, right? You make judgments about them. Arabs. What else? Multiply tattooed. Actually, the kid with the razor blade in their cheek and their purple hair mohawk, right? If you ask them what is it that bothers them about people, what they say is like, people are always looking at me, man. And you're like, dude, right? And all oppressed racial minority groups. So I am driving in the streets of North Philadelphia in a primarily Latino neighborhood, and say my little girls are in the back seat, and I stop at a corner, and there is someone with a paper bag drinking. What do? I lock the doors, they hear the sounds. I am walking on the streets of Philadelphia, and it's 45 degrees out, and there's a young black man walking with a hoodie. What do? I cross the street, I check my wallet. Like the air he breathes, he learns that people hold him to low expectation. And that is poison. Poison to someone's self-image. Poison to someone's belief about who they are. And how does he absorb it? He absorbs it through my body language. Now let's talk about power. Now, before I wasn't talking about me really, because I don't cross the street. But now, although, does that mean that I am free of any racist attitude? How could I have grown up in America and say that I was and be honest with myself? Okay? So let's now talk about power. Now we are talking about me. Name the ways in which I, Ken Ginsberg, have power. I am male. White would depend on how you would define white. What else? I'm a doctor, so I am highly educated. That's 28 years of school. It's the only power I've earned. I kind of like it, even if I was forced into it. But enough about that. What else? What? Upper middle class. I'm actually, if we can say it, rich, right? My problems are things like, will I have enough money saved for college? Can I go on a vacation this year, and is it to the Caribbean or Europe? What can I afford? Those are my problems. I'm rich. Okay? What else? What else?
You're highly articulate.
Thank you. Thank you. And quite good looking. Yeah, humble. Yeah. So the point is that I have power. As a wealthy white man, I have power. And you know something? I like it. I like having power. Power is something every single human being should feel because it gives you a sense of control. Power is something every single human being deserves. Now let's talk about the young black man on the street. Where does he get power from? Is he likely to get the message from society that says, I am investing very heavily in your education and I expect you to lead us into the future? Is that likely his message, despite having an African American president? Is that likely the message he's getting? I think not. Where does he get power from vis-a-vis me, the man who really has the power? Let's be honest. Possibly a weapon, but absolutely from my fear. When I cross the street, when I clutch my pocket, I communicate I am afraid to you. And when he is 12 years old and he has just transformed from being cute into being someone who makes people cross the street, he is devastated. And when he is 14, he is confused. And when he is 16, he is angry. And what he learns is that the way to draw power back from the man who has taken the power is to use the power that you have, which is the power of fear. So how do we break this? And that is what the attitude is. If you look at any one of the marginalized groups that I talked about, what they all have in common is an attitude. An attitude is a defensive posture that says, I have been hurt by people like you, and I will not set myself up for that pain again. It is a defensive posture. And how do we change that attitude? We say things like, you won't have that kind of attitude with me. Not so good. How do we break that attitude? with love and with respect, which is really what we're talking about today. And it begins with our body language. When we do, this does not say I'm a racist who fears you. It really doesn't. I might be cold, I might be uncomfortable, but it also doesn't say I'm not. When we pay attention to our body language, when we make ourselves open, when we welcome people heartily, and we don't start with what's wrong with you, but we say, what's the thing you're proudest of in your life? Tell me what's happened since the last time I've seen you. Make me proud, give me goosebumps. When we do that with open arms and we don't turn our backs by looking at the dang computer in our medical record system, okay, then we convey, another issue of mine, but then we convey that we have the potential to love. Now let's talk about behavioral change. So I'm not very bright. So what I do is take a whole bunch of theories that I can't understand because they have really big words in it, and then kind of condense them down. But as I see it, behavioral change, if you take all the behavioral change theories in the world, what they really say is, hey, there's about 5 steps to behavioral change. The first thing that we need to do is be aware of a problem, because if you're not aware of a problem, you're certainly not going to take action. After you're aware of a problem, you have to be personally motivated to want to do something about the problem, because if you're not personally motivated, you're not going to do something. As long as the problem belongs to other people, I'm not taking action, right? We know this from early HIV epidemic, right? HIV, we were all terrified until we learned that it was only gay white men. And then as soon as we knew that, we all went back to our old behaviors, right? You have to be personally motivated. Once you're personally motivated, the question is, do we have any skills to be able to do something about the issue? If you have the skills, then you go through a process of going through the trial and error. What have I given up? What have I gained, right? And if, so I want to quit smoking cigarettes, and that's good. Because when she kisses me, I'm not going to go like, or she's not going to go, ooh, and my teeth aren't going to be yellow, and I'm going to save $8 a day, but damn, I'm nervous. That kid ready to quit? Not until you give them coping strategies to replace that which they were using previously. Not until you do that. And then finally, will I maintain the new behavior or will I not maintain the new behavior? And what's that about? That is about how people will undermine versus support my new behaviors. Right? That is where it gets back to that Rudyard Montana thing. What is the messages we are going to portray about kids? What are our expectations of kids? I want to be a virgin until I'm married. How do people respond? Do people say, Ken, I'm so strong, I'm so proud of your spiritual and religious center? Or do they go, what's wrong with you, man? Right? That's what maintenance is about. So this is all the behavioral change theories in a nutshell, as I simplistically see them, and they're all missing something. What they're missing is that confidence gets it started, and shame paralyzes all efforts. And when we sit with a human being, starting with their brokenness, starting with what is wrong with them, we bring shame to their lives. In adolescent medicine, I was taught to remember 2 numbers. My mentors told me probably the first day, I want you to think of 2 numbers, and I want you to think of them every single time you see a teenager. The first number is that 80% of what kills kids doesn't need to happen. 50% of kids who do kill themselves see a doctor in the previous month. 25% in the previous week. And so for these reasons, I was to sit with human beings and I was to think about what was wrong with them, to get the history of their brokenness so that I could come back with 3 or 4 answers, very simplistically, of why they should change. Does that work? No. It's intrinsically shameful, and people shut down. And the last thing marginalized and traumatized and reactive kids need is one more person saying, let me tell you what's wrong with you. So what do we need to do? We need to look at people differently. We need to find build their confidence. How? By finding their competencies. Here's the field of a kid's life. This kid's using drugs. Shame on you. That's incredibly self-destructive behavior. This kid is selling drugs, which is destructive not only to society, not only to himself, but to society. And this kid wants to become pregnant. She's 14 years old. And what do? In all of our wisdom, we say to the kid, stop that. Let me give you 4 to 5 reasons so that you can understand what you're doing is fundamentally wrong. Inspired? Ready to change? So let's look at the young man who's using drugs. Don't you know that marijuana will fry your brain, shrink your balls, and make you grow breasts? All of which is essentially, with a little bit of poetic license, true. All right? But what do? You say that to a kid. What do they say? Thanks, doc. And then they're smoking again. Why? Because you've stressed them out. They've got to deal with the problem. So my favorite kids, what do we know? The kid who uses drugs, what does that kid possess? These are my favorite kids. No one hates drugs more than I do, I guarantee you. But they're my favorite kids. Why? Why can you imagine that they're my favorite kids? They're taking action to deal with what? Stress, and they are feeling the stress. There's so many ways of dealing with pain, right? You can starve it out, you can fight it out, you can sex it out, you can cut it out. There's so many ways of dealing with pain. The kids who are doing drugs are doing what? They're trying to become numb. What kind of human beings are trying to become numb? Those with feelings. So my intervention with that young man is going to be, man, do you ever feel like your head is just spinning? Do you ever feel like you wish you could fix things at home, and you wish you could fix things at school? And people are always saying, like, you don't care about things, but that's because they don't know you. They don't know you. Do you ever feel like you just wish you could do it all, but you can't, but at least once a day, twice a day, and your feelings get better? And then they go, exactly. And now I have started from their point of strength, from their point of power. And now I can say, a man like you with your sensitivity, you're the kind of man who we need to be able to take over my world. And we build. The kid who's using gangs, I hate gangs. And if I was on the street, I would never stop and say, hello, I'm from Covenant House, may I join your little circle? Not happening. But in my office, these are the kids with the highest levels of loyalty. Once you reach them, these kids will stick with you forever. All they were looking for was connection and safety, right? And the kid who wants to become pregnant, what does she want to be? She wants to be loved. When we talk about pregnancy prevention, we make it sound like a disease. We should celebrate their desire to love, their capacity to want to make the world better for another generation, perhaps because they didn't see it. And we should talk instead of delaying the celebration, not preventing pregnancy. And then what we do is we overtake the field of risk. So for those of us who are resilience-based interventionists, we are not blind to risk at all. We do this because of risk. We understand the trauma that created it, but what we do instead in a loving way is we sit with a human being and we say, how can we move forward? I have many examples. This is an 18-year-old boy. This is a white kid who grew up in Harlem, Spanish Harlem, and he comes to see me on a Friday. He came in the night or 2 nights before. He's presented to me by a medical student. The medical student says, Ken, you have to go see this kid. There's something wrong. I won't be able to sit because you guys won't see me, but he's kind of sitting like this. Like the kid wasn't talking to the med student. He's sitting like this. What is this the look of? This is shame. So I set the stage with him and talked about why it would be safe to talk and why I might, maybe, be worthy of his trust. And then I asked him if he wanted to tell me his story. And then he said to me, I got kicked out of my mom's house 8 months ago. Do you ask him why? No, because kids are like onions. So you do one layer at a time. And he said, I got kicked out of my mom's house 8 months ago. I went down to Port Authority or Times Square to figure out how to live. And I ate out of trash cans for about 3 weeks. Slept on the subways, always during the day, because if you sleep there during night, they roll you. Learned to sit next to the college students, because they would always leave me a sandwich or something. So I was in the square. I forgot to tell you, this is one of the best looking kids I've ever seen in my whole life. Like Abercrombie and Fitch material, dead straight, all right? So I was down in the Times Square one day eating out of a trash can, and this guy came up to me, and he said to me, if you begin dealing with me, you're going to have everything you ever want, a feast every night, all the girls you'd ever want, your own place, everything. I didn't want to do it, man. My mom was an addict. I remember being 3 years old and watching smoke come out of her nose and then seeing this smile come across her face, and I'd be asking myself, why can't I make my mom happy like that? She had visitors every day, 10, 20 visitors. We just had one room. There was just a sheet in the middle of the room, and I'd have to face the wall while they'd be groaning and she'd be screaming. And I would be sitting there thinking, how can she love those men more than she loves me? And I didn't want to do that to any other little kid, you know? But I was so hungry, and I don't know if you've ever been that hungry. I don't know if you've ever felt like that. So I began dealing. You know, he was right. That night I had a feast, and I had as much as I ever wanted every night. I got my own place with like a lock, my own door with one of those locks you can't even move things. And I had all the girls I ever wanted. Yeah, it was scary. What do? You just go like this and people almost always back off. Yeah, I had to shoot at people a couple times, but always over their head, you know, because I never wanted to really hurt anybody. So what happened? Yeah, so I was walking on the street and I saw this girl, and I never sold her anything. You know, maybe she was like 26, 27 years old. I never saw her anything, but she was just laying there. And the effing suits, you know, they're walking by her like she's trash or something. And I went up to her and I smashed her face around. I was like, you got to breathe. And I'm not proud of this or anything, but I called 911, you know? And then when they came, I ran. But I went to the corner and I watched. I watched as they put something on her face. I watched as they pumped on her chest. And then I watched as the effing suits were gathered around in a circle, you know? They thought it was like really interesting. And they were like calling their wives like, hey, I'm watching some kid die, you know? And I watched as she died. But you know what I saw? I saw me. Maybe in like a month, maybe in a year. But I saw me dying. And the effing suits walking by like I was absolutely nothing. And you know what? I don't think I am trash. I really don't. And I had like just $14 in my pocket, you know, and I went down to Port Authority and I bought a ticket and I just said, where? And they said, Philly. So I guess I'm your problem now, huh, Dr. Ken? So I said to him, you were an addict and you were a dealer and you carried weapons? Shame on you. What do you love about this kid? All that. What I said exactly was, tell me something. Tell me how all the effing suits don't have a soul, and you're the man who's been through it all, and you're the only man with a soul. Teach me about you. Teach me about your compassion and how you kept it. Because if I learn that about you, I swear I will be a better man myself. And he wept, and he became my puppy dog. And that is all that I do. All that I do is I listen for the stories that nobody else hears. I listen with different parts of my body. Because what happens as we get further in our training is we have models and paradigms about how we are going to heal. And when we do that, we get stuck in our heads. It becomes about us and the next course of action that we are going to take. And as a result, we lose what our viscera tells us. What part of your body tells you that you love? Like it really feels something. Your stomach, well, let's go that. Your heart, right? Think about it. Like, you know, you naturally grasp it. God, I love him. Valentine's Day, I had a broken heart. When you really love and when you really care, you actually feel something. Get out of your head and into your body. What part of your body says that you're worried about someone? That's your stomach. It was like he kicked me in the gut. I don't know, I feel kind of sick. I'm blessed with goosebumps. So that when I feel like and I show kids all the time, they're like, dude, all right? But the choreograph that I try to follow goes something like this. I love you, I love you, I love you. And how do I express my love? By telling them back the story. So I say very little as I listen, but I wait until my heart is going, God, I want this kid to make it. This kid deserves better. This kid surprises me. They shocked me. Why does this kid have compassion despite the fact that he was shown none? How is this kid resilient in a world that would have killed me? These are the things you're looking for. And when you feel that, that is what I mean by love. And when you then can go back, and love shouldn't scare us. It scares us because we speak English. So if I say, Dan, I love you, there's a potential problem because it could involve genitals. But if we spoke other languages, right, then what would happen is that we would be saying in Hebrew, we'd be saying chesed, love of humanity, Arabic, mahaba, love of humanity, agape in Christianity. There's so many different words that we shouldn't be afraid of the fact that we have love for humanity. And what we are conveying basically is, without using any of the words or the body language, okay, I love you, I love you, I love you. Pause, deep breath, but I'm feeling worried about you. May we come up with a solution. How can I serve you? Heart, stomach, head, hands. You listen with your body until you see the beauty of the kid in front of you and why you want them desperately to succeed, why you know that they should succeed, especially because of what they've been through and what they bring to the world. And then there is no shame in the room. And then the behavioral change process can begin. If you speak to people who have been through very, very difficult times and you ask them what turned their lives around, the sentence you will always hear, go talk to 23-year-olds. It's always going to be something like, you know, it was when Miss Nadine made me understand I was not trash. It was when Miss Andy made me understand that there was something inside of me. That is the moment we're looking for, and that is what I call love. Let me tell you something else. This is also about burnout prevention. Did you see the choreograph I did? I love you, I love you, I love you. Pause, deep breath, but I'm feeling worried about you. It is a choreograph. Does that make it phony? No. Let me tell you something. I wasn't intending to go into academic medicine, as Angelo can tell you. I got a job out of residency to become the homeless health director in New York for Covenant House. It was the prime job if you were interested in homeless medicine. I was top of the world. No one else was competing. And I was fabulous when I was 27, okay? I looked like the kids. I looked like I was about 21. Remember, I reached puberty when I was 16. And the way in which I expressed love for kids was by telling them what I felt. I tapped a vein. I bled for every kid in front of me. I would have been amazing. For how long? Maybe 6 months. You run out of blood. This kind of a choreograph, when all that I'm doing is listening to the kid's story and reflecting it back, I don't need to bleed. I need to listen and feel and then speak. And then I go home. Because there's something else that I know. Kids are the experts in their own lives. It is not for me to rescue. When I believe that it is for me to rescue, I actually undermine their sense of competence. When I understand that they are the experts in their own lives and it's for them to heal, but for another human being to have caught the reason and the legitimacy that they must heal so that they can lead us into the future, then I can go home with my family and I will do this for 20 more years because I know now what to do and I feel okay walking away as well. What are our bottom lines? We need to help youth know how much they matter. It is about listening to them. It is about celebrating them. It is about recognizing the credentials they bring to the world. You know, our kids are not broken. Let me tell you who my Covenant House kids are. These are the gang members. These are the kids who have been sexually exploited. These are the kids who are in and out of the system and in and out of the prison. Let me tell you who they want to be. They want to be the teachers, the DHS workers, the social workers, the doctors, the forensic psychologists. That's who all my kids want to be. They want to be healers. And they are magnificently equipped to do so. They come to the world with a different kind of credential. And when we pity them and see them as broken and feel like our job is to rescue them, we take away the power that they actually have and what they actually bring to the world. The question for us is, will we intervene at the right time or will we give up? Because we know something else. We know that if we don't grab these kids in late adolescence and say, I do believe in you, I see in you, your potential and your beauty and give them the opportunities, then hopelessness will set in. And then the cycle of poverty, injustice, and oppression continues. We have to do the work that it takes to love. When you come to me at Covenant House, what you do and you present to me, you have to present with, this is Roger, and what I love about him is. So for those of you who don't know medical presentations, it looks like this. This is a 16-year-old African-American female who's presenting with, okay? To Ken, you have to say, this is a 16-year-old who's presenting with, and the reason I love her is. Because when we do the hard work, and you can't say things like, I like her nails, okay? You have to do the hard work of figuring out why this kid is so deserving of healing and of a positive future. You have to do that whole work because it will change your perspective on how you view humanity. And when that happens, what we convey will feel different, completely different. For those of us who work with trauma repeatedly, we see things that therefore but the grace of God go our daughters, our mothers, our children, and ourselves. And it is overwhelming and it is terrifying. And as a result, for those of us who see trauma all the time, well, forget trauma. Just think about when there is a mugging on the street. What is the first thing you think about? Well, I don't walk on that side of the street. I don't go out at 10 at night. We all have mechanisms to make us think this could not happen to me. This is about emotional survival in a world that is in fact unpredictable. That's what it's about. When we work with trauma, what we do is we begin othering. We begin saying, this doesn't happen to people like me. And whether othering is about sexuality or poverty or race, we begin deciding why we are safe. And when we begin othering, when our solution to our pain begins placing blame on the person's group, we stop feeling. We shut down. Are we protected emotionally? In the short term. In the long term, we lose the capacity to love. And when we lose the capacity to love, we lose the capacity to heal. There is no other. There is only us. Thank you.
Wow. So every time I hear Ken, and I hear him a lot because I want to, I learn something new, I get something out of it, and I feel inspired. And speaking of inspiration, here she comes. Sandy Bloom is a national treasure who we claim as local grown and organic. You heard Martha describe yesterday how she's in many ways responsible for our ACEs work in Philadelphia. And she's been talking about trauma and trauma theory, and she brought me presents, apparently, to groups of like 5,000 people at a time for more than 2 decades, which, if I do the math, is like 675,000 people. She's a brilliant and tireless advocate and in her own right revolutionary, and a founding member of the ISF board, thank you very much, co-director of the Center for Nonviolence and Social Justice at the School of Public Health at Drexel University, and she's been to many of our communities. Dr. Bloom's a board-certified psychiatrist, associate professor of health management and policy, and also the founder of the Sanctuary Institute and a distinguished fellow at the Andrus Children's Center.
Thank you, Joel. Morning. I figured that if I was going to have to follow Kenny, I was going to have some props. So Thomas is here with us today. I'm a Philly girl. Are my slides up? Okay. And is this the thing that moves? Oh, cool. Okay. My job is to talk to you about resilient systems of care and what that means. Well, we have to know what we're up against. We have to know what we're dealing with. We need to know how exactly do things change. We have to know how to get around obstacles to change, and we need to know how to create the context within which that change can occur. Well, what are we up against? We're up against some really bad stuff. Humanity's traumatic past. It has not been easy for a human being to be a human being, and it is miraculous that we have survived, because there are all kinds of ways we were designed to be eaten by very hungry animals that were a lot bigger than us. But as a result of that, we are really up against our own biology, our own psychology, and our own sociology or group dynamics, because we're not prepared to live really in the environments that we live in. And H.G. Wells noted that, right after World War I. He said, human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe. And that's really what we're all here about, is how do we educate people about this amazing information we now know. A question that bothers me, and I think probably bothers a lot of the people in this room, is are we going in the opposite direction? Are we really driving ourselves as a whole culture towards national and global traumatic second-order change? This is the 10 best post-apocalyptic movies just of 2013. No movies about a vision of getting past this. The last time that happened was the original Star Trek. I'm a Trekkie. So all we get is constantly bombarded as whole cultures, and of course so does the next generation and the kids. And that's really actually, when you step back and look at it, very frightening. And this is what could happen. For those of you in the back who can't see, a bunch of guys down there talking to each other, 2 guys on a stage doing a piece of theater, a rock's coming down, and the 2 guys down there saying, "You're going to hate how it ends." So my real question, I think, for all of us is, can we consciously, deliberately evolve quickly enough to avoid the many ways that we have of becoming an extinct species? And I think it's really still an open question. I think the key to answering that question and maybe coming out with a future is adverse childhood experiences and study and all that it means and everything that we've been here to talk about. Because it's really hard to change effects if you don't know what's causing things. And now we know a lot more about causality, about where all this complicated stuff that plagues our culture and individual people is coming from. Well, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with living systems. So when we talk about creating resilient systems of care, all of our systems of care are alive. And living systems theory, it's really a general theory that was first really explicated in 1978. It's a general theory about the existence of all living systems and their structure, interaction, behavior, and development. And this slide says, warning, systems always create curves ahead. And that's why it's so hard to work in systems, is that they are not straightforward and they are not linear. Systems, what is a system? In case you need a little review or remembrance of what systems theory, as you learned it hopefully at some point in time, it's a lot like the human body. The human body is totally interconnected and interdependent, and that's what a system is. It's a set of interconnected elements that are interdependent, so that changes in some element or their relationships produce changes in other parts of the system. And the tricky part about it is that the entire system exhibits properties and behaviors that are different from those of the parts when it's put together. So when the system is all put together, something emerges out of that that can't be explained or reduced to its individual parts. That means we have to understand complexity theory. It means we have to understand the science of change as it's developing in complex adaptive systems. Well, that's really also pretty challenging, because there are lots of paradoxes that exist in living systems, whether we're talking about you or your family or the mental health system, or the whole social service system, anywhere, the child welfare system, it doesn't matter. Living systems are complex, they do adapt, but they're constantly changing. Yet, at the same time, all systems resist change. All systems try to become homeostatic, try to maintain an equilibrium or a balance. At the same time as that, however, the most stable equilibrium is death. So this whole issue of change but not too much, and how fast and how coherently do we change is pretty important. Simple cause and effect explanations of anything in a system break down as soon as there are two or more variables. Simple solutions to complex problems don't work. And all of our significant social problems are complex. They are what's called non-linear, while our preferred solutions are simple and linear. And therefore, they're doomed. They won't work. And because they're alive, our systems are very vulnerable to stress, particularly chronic and repetitive stress, and they are vulnerable to trauma. And the experience can be as devastating to a whole system as it is for individual people. Now, you might be able to relate to this slide. This is everybody in healthcare, mental health, social services. That's what they're experiencing. Does anybody want to disagree with this? Any? And now the next slide is the slide you are never supposed to make. See that little orange box in there? That is where you have worked, where you work now, or where you will work. That's what it feels like, and therein lies the problem. I made the horrible slide to illustrate the enormous complexity of this, because it's not an issue of right or wrong. All of these forces are trying to do something good, but there are very few people that are supposed to address all that. And the burden on us, all of us, is absolutely enormous. The result when that keeps happening, and it's over and over, and it's unrelenting, is what I've called organizational hyperarousal. And that means when everything is a crisis. And I just want to give you a quick overview about what that looks like. Well, in a crisis that is repetitive, what you get in a system is a loss of basic safety and trust. People just don't feel safe with each other. They don't trust each other. Comes out in a whole lot of different ways. But the major way it comes out is we stop being able to regulate our distress. So people are popping off all over the place, or withdrawing, or doing whatever they individually do when they're emotionally distressed. In a system, it leads to communication breakdown. More and more, in the business world, the things we call elephants in the room are called undiscussables. So the more and more accumulation of elephants in the room. Elephants are big, imagine a couple of them in here, no room for us. And that's what happens in an organization. The organizational grapevine that carries 70% of organizational information gets poisoned, nasty rumors, horrible gossip, misinformation. There are thus increased interpersonal conflicts, and therefore there is less healthy conflict, healthy discussion. You get boundary issues. Boundaries in living systems have to be semi-permeable, but if they get too rigid or too loose, the system starts to fall apart. And you get, when it gets rigid, you get information silos, which is what we currently have. Nobody can talk to anybody else across systems. And then you start forgetting. The systems start forgetting what they used to know that was effective. And as a result, they start repeating all of the stuff that doesn't really work. As that happens, people start losing hope, and they start dropping out in one way or another. Even if their bodies are still there, their minds aren't there. And that is a state of learned helplessness, which is really toxic for anybody and can affect an entire system. And that's also how you can end up having a hostile workplace. If it really gets bad, the whole system collapses, but I can't make that happen with this doohickey. We call that parallel process. So you have clients who have very similar problems to the staff, and then the whole organization is repeating that. The definition is when two or more systems, whether these consist of individuals, groups, or organizations, have significant relationships with one another, they tend to develop similar thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And I think this is why our systems often recapitulate the toxic experiences that people have had in the first place. And we call it treatment or intervention when it's actually just making people worse. And nobody wants to do that. It is something that happens in the process of these ever-enlarging group process, group dynamic experiences. So I think, just a second. One of the real questions to us is, join or die. So how does change occur? There are two main ways that change occurs. First order change, which is doing more or less of something we're already doing. And second order change, that's deciding or sometimes being forced to do something entirely different that we have not done in the past, different from what we've done in the past. So I thought that was cute for that. First order change is based on top-down, leaders tell people what to do and they do it. There's adjustments that are made then within the existing structure. It's doing more or less of something. It's reversible. It restores the homeostasis, which is what it's always about. Something has disrupted the system and it's meant to get it back in balance. It is not transformational and new learning is not required. And the old story that's always been there can always be told. Second order change is very different. And the butterfly, of course, is the symbol of second order transformative change. It's sudden and unpredictable. It's a new way of seeing things. It's about shifting gears. You can't go backwards. It often begins not through the formal system, but through the informal system. It requires new learning, and a new story is told. It is transformation to something quite different than existed before. So the larvae to the butterfly, that's why that's an image. Living systems go through both. So you can't make transformation happen, and really that's what has to happen in our systems. You can't make it happen, but you can remove the obstacles and you can create a context within which transformative change can occur. And I think that's what we really need to be thinking about. But how does that work? According to chaos theory and complexity theory, a system is drawn to a certain attractor fields. Think of them like magnets that keep a system in place. So it's kind of like you don't like to exercise, your doctor tells you you have to exercise, you sign up for a gym, you go the first 5 weeks, the first week you go every 5 days. And then the second week you go 3 days. And the second you go 2. And then that next week you're really busy and you don't go at all. And you're back to your equilibrium state, which is your attraction really is not exercising, it's sitting at home and watching TV. Okay, every living system has an attractor field that holds it in place and keeps it steady. A little movement may perturb the system. You may get a funding change or somebody leaves or a leader goes away and you may have a perturbation, it's called, for a little while. But as soon as possible and through first order behavior, the system will seek equilibrium through these things called equilibrium seeking processes. So will our field if we're not aware that this is happening. Well, to really get transformational change, you have to be able to do what's called, in a system, double loop learning. There's single loop and double loop. Single loop learning is we look at what we do, we see the results, and then we problem solve and try to do what we do better, which is fine, but if you really want transformative change, it's not enough. You have to do double loop learning, which is you do that, And then you also look at your results and question whether your underlying assumptions are even accurate. That's what ACEs is doing for the field. That's what trauma is doing for the field. It's making our question all of our basic assumptions that we've made in the past about human nature, really, about human beings and what's happened to them. Well, if they do not right themselves, if first-order change in a system doesn't work, then turbulence increases, and the system doesn't restabilize the way it was, and it is now on what's called the edge of chaos. Now, that may sound scary. It's called a far from equilibrium condition, but actually, the system has become loosened. It's not locked into place anymore. And it's not dissolving completely and dying. It is actually where all creativity and innovation and transformation occurs. A system, whether it's an individual or a family or an organization or a whole country, has to get out on the edge of chaos for anything really transformative to happen. However, it makes us really scared. It's a really uncomfortable place to be. And the outcomes are unpredictable. You do not know ahead of time what's going to emerge. That's the whole point, that it's going to be something new that you've never seen, so you couldn't really predict it. It is change, it's the need of change to be released. Well, how does that happen? Well, a new paradigm has to exist for that to happen. Thomas Kuhn wrote about this in the last scientific revolution. A new paradigm has to exist, and we have that. We now have a very different paradigm for human nature and for what goes wrong with human beings. And a new paradigm has to exist, but you also have to then have the emergence of what are called strange attractors. We'll get back to that. When that happens, a system will self-organize. It doesn't have to be told what to do. It will self-organize in this transit through a chaotic, turbulent process. And that can go in different ways. It may lead to increased complexity, or it may lead to regression, disintegration, to life or to death. You just don't know ahead of time. Self-organization is a process by which a structure or a pattern emerges that is not directed by anybody. It is really an emergence out of what has already happened. An emergence is the outcome of self-organization. It's a new state or a new condition that we've never had before. Well, what ACEs is telling us is that aiming at individual change in all the people that we work with, it's necessary. So all the things we're doing about finding better treatment approaches, I mean, it's necessary, but it will never be sufficient. We now know there are so many more individual issues than we could possibly have enough other people to address. It's just not, it's not possible. So we have to think about second-order change and how we bring that around. Our systems of care need to be engaged in second-order transformative change, which again is scary, but it's urgent. The clock is ticking for every child in America. Every moment that we don't have solutions to these problems, every moment we're not preventing childhood adversity, a kid is basically gone down. So there is a real urgency about finding these solutions, but there are also significant obstacles. What are they? Well, not enough knowledge is spread around yet. There are perverse incentives that we need to look at in our systems. There's very little double loop learning, really challenging those basic assumptions. There's a history, of course, of entrenched bureaucracy, limited resources, inadequate, ill-informed leadership, because we pay very little attention in our fields to management training, preparing people to be in leadership positions, lack of participatory processes, insufficient time for collaboration, and in many places a pretty demoralized workforce. Well, Now there's other obstacles too. We are faced with enormous complexity in our culture. And human beings and human groups, when faced with complexity, become reductionistic. And we can do it in a number of ways. We can do it biologically and say everything is biological, so just wait till they figure that out. We can do it psychologically and say, no, everything is about the individual. And we just need to have all those treatment approaches and we'll be fine. We can do it socially and say the whole thing, it's all about culture, class, race, war, all that. And if we fix that, then everything will be okay. Or spiritual. You can't do anything really. You have to wait for God and pray a lot. All causes supernatural. So that's how, different people will reduce in the face of anxiety. And actually, we need all of those. We need to understand the biology and the psychology and the social aspects, the social dynamics, and the spiritual aspects of healing, of how people have developed problems and how they heal. But the result of that is that through the 20th century, this is a British philosopher who said, as a result of reductionism, we've come to know more and more about less and less. And perhaps the biggest obstacle to change is that when change shows up, something old stops and something new begins. And that means all change involves loss. So resistance to change isn't really resistance to change, it's resistance to loss. And we don't like grief. We don't like losing. And so that may be, wherever you are, the biggest obstacle to change. We are up against not only humanity's traumatic past, but the incredibly astonishing power of humanity to repeat their past. And that's because of trauma. Trauma shatters the sense that we can, it's called a sense of coherence, that we can understand, manage, and find meaning in our world. And we have a long history of ignoring trauma, of knowing it and forgetting it because it's too much to bear and we don't know what to do about it. The current attractors that keep our systems in equilibrium now, I'll tell you what I think they are. It keeps everything very stable and keeps it from changing. Money, power, fame, and fear. Everything rotates around that. The whole culture, our little organizations, wherever you are, that is what keeps us from any kind of transformative setting. So, what does creating the context for transformative change, what's that mean? What's it look like? Well, we need a lot of knowledge. All that science is telling us about the physical self, the developing self, the emotional self, the social self, the moral self, and how traumatic experience changes all that and skews it in so many different ways. And we have to reckon with the paradigm that we're moving towards, make it a clearer outline, distinguish it, figure out how to work within it. Because this paradigm says that everything is connected to everything else, that it is enormously complex, that it is a living system, and that if you get out of its way and give it feed it, it will self-organize. That life is self-organizing change, and it is nonlinear. You can't direct it exactly. You can create the conditions with which it happens, but you can't make it happen. That's what transformation is about. Now, ACEs, in chaos theory, they talk about the sensitive dependence on initial conditions. And that's why the issue of childhood adversity is so important, because what we're talking about is that sensitive dependence, that it doesn't determine what's going to happen, but it does influence. History influences the future of any system's evolution, but it doesn't have to determine it because the system is alive. And there are an infinite number of possibilities that unfold within every minute because of neuroplasticity, and because we now know human intention can change the brain and therefore can change the future. But that's where we're caught. We're right in between. right in that gap, hovering over top of this space, and we don't know where it's going, and we don't even know if we're going to make it across that gap. And it's a very uncomfortable place for all of us to be. So what do we need? We need a new attractor system, badly. We need new attractors, and they're going to be a little strange. Not unlike what Kenny was talking about. The big one we need love. We need love. We need safety, real safety, not just physical safety, but a focus on psychological, social, and moral safety as well. We need trust, to be able to trust each other, which is significantly social trust way down in the past 30 years. We need healing, we need health, we need freedom, we need participation, connection, fulfillment, and meaning. And we have to figure out, using the ACEs data and using all the science, how we build an attractor system that actually pulls people more towards that and away from what it is. ACEs demonstrates that all context matters. Every part of being a human being, every experience that human beings can have, it matters to outcomes, to what's going to happen. So creating a context for emergent transformative change is no mean feat. And it's really hard because we're all immersed in science and trained in science, and that's a very, very linear way of going about things. And it's great for certain things, but it's not enough for what I'm talking about. So my work is around the sanctuary model, and it's really about trying to figure out, I don't say we've got it all figured out, but we are working on, so what does it take to create a system that promotes far from equilibrium conditions in a safe enough way that things don't entirely fall apart? Well, we know that people need knowledge. They have to share a knowledge base. And it's all the knowledge that we've been talking about for 2 days, and a lot more than that. They have to share values as a whole system. Everybody in the system, from the maintenance folks and the food service folks to the board members and everybody else. And those are commitments to nonviolence, to emotional intelligence, social learning, open communication, social responsibility, democracy, and growth and change. And they're interactive, and you can't cherry pick them. You got to do all of them. And it is really challenging to have to live to a value system. We have a shared language that makes it a little simpler. We call it SELF. It stands for safety, emotions, loss, and future. That helps us to organize everything. And even little 5-year-olds can tell you what that means. And the staff can then have a communication, easy communication with any age child and their family and the grown-ups that are in the system. We have a shared practice we call the Sanctuary Toolkit, which is getting down to the ground of trying to figure out what do people have to do regularly in order to create the processes that allow transformative experiences to emerge. And the shared mission is a parallel process of recovery for individuals, for workers, for organizations, and in my wildest fantasies, for our culture. Jim Wallace wrote years ago in The Soul of Politics, he said, the truth is that we are in a time of transition. It's an in-between period when the old is dying and the new has yet to be born. The values, assumptions, and structures that have governed us for so long have come to their logical end, even if they haven't died. And we now find ourselves at a dead end. And that's what I find scary. But Lewis Mumford, who was an American philosopher, said every transformation has rested on a new metaphysical and ideological base, upon deeper stirrings and intuitions whose rationalized expression takes the form of a new picture of the cosmos and the nature of man. And that is what ACEs is giving us, is a whole new idea about the nature of man that we can now substantiate. It's not just liberals versus conservatives. It's really about what science is telling us about what people are really about. So we have some choices. Right now, we live in a world where human intelligence and technology are coming together. And we have to decide whether that's going to create heaven or hell. And that is our choice. We, the collectively we, will determine the door we pick. It really is a choice. And that's really the choice, whether we're going to get interconnected and unite or it's curtains. Stu Kaufman said, "The web of life, the most complex system we know of in the universe, breaks no law of physics, yet is partially lawless, ceaselessly creative. So too are human history and human lives. This creativity is stunning, awesome, and worthy of reverence. One view of God is that God is our chosen name for the ceaseless creativity in the natural universe, biosphere, and human cultures." I think I'm over now. Thank you. You can keep him here.
That's a lot of work to do, guys. I don't know if my brain hurts thinking about all the stuff that we have to do to make that happen, but frankly, it's a great transformative speech, which I'd not heard before, so thank you so much. And love the slides. So we are going to take a 15-minute break and then reconvene for our next roundtable discussions. So beat to the bathroom.